Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. Thank you for joining us for Spent Grain and Stale Bread, Preserving the Value of Food Through Upcycling. We are so excited to have this panel, incredible, diverse perspectives on this idea. We'll just get started with a little bit of intros. So I'm going to just start all the way around. And so Dr. Lara, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of kick it off from there.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Victoria. My name's Lara Ramdin. I'm the Chief Innovation and Science Officer of Upcycle Foods, Inc.
Awesome. And Joe?
Hey, everyone. I'm Joe Gaynor. I'm the head cider maker for Angry Orchard and work at our Walden facility in New York.
And Chad?
Hey, everybody. Chad Townsend from Millie's Homemade Ice Cream. Thanks for having us here. Really excited for some stimulating discussion.
Awesome. So we're going to get started, just kind of dive right in and frame this whole story. Each of you coming from different perspectives of this industry and working on this idea of how do we continue to really bring value and dignity to the food that we're eating, and really, what does this look like? How do we appreciate every aspect through food's life cycle, and also aspects of, during the manufacturing process? What are some things that maybe are ingredients or things that we can use in a way that maybe we haven't thought of before? So Lara, we're going to kick it off to you. If you want to go ahead and share a little info about upcycling foods.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about upcycling and upcycle food. My dalliance with upcycled food started really when I used to work for a brewery. So I used to work for Molson Coors, and I was trying to figure out what we would do with our spent grain. We had a waste to worth program, and I actually met the company that I now work for. I met Dan and Dalton at Upcycle Foods, and they were going to help us figure out what we were going to do with our spent grain. Cut to 6 years later, and I now work with these guys. If you could go to the next slide, please, Patrick. I think all of us here are here because we understand that a lot of food is being wasted, and we just don't like it. We think it's criminal, and we want to do something about it. I think that's the common thing that unites us. So if there's a couple of things that I can leave you with, is that 38% of all the food that's made in the United States is wasted. And that's across all the different sectors. That's within manufacturing, that's at the farm level, that's at home. And so I think we can do better. Because obviously when that food is wasted, not only is the food wasted, but all the resources to make that food are also wasted. If you could move to the next slide, Patrick. So globally, and obviously the US isn't the only culprit, that's happening across many, many different countries. I would say that across the world, different regions are tackling the issue of food waste differently. In Europe, there are quite some significant policies to reduce food waste by 2030, and France and the UK, for example, at the forefront of halving their waste already. They're already halfway to their food waste reduction targets. I think the other thing that ignites my passion is that if food waste in America were a country, it would be just behind the US and China in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not sure that people really fully understand that when food is wasted, that it goes to landfill. I don't think that people really think about where food goes once they've put it in the trash can and once they put it in the bin. And in this country in particular is not particularly good at separating waste. So in other countries, particularly in the UK, we have systems where organic waste goes in one bin and plastics are sorted, glass is sorted, paperboard is sorted. In this country, we don't really have the infrastructure for that. And even though in some states there is an organic trash can now, particularly in California, for example, the number of people that are using it, the number of people that are actually going that extra mile so that their food waste is composted, for example, is very small. So I think both from a moral perspective, from a planetary perspective, and just from I would say from a human perspective, because we are all people who are concerned that food is being wasted, nutrition is being wasted, but there are lots and lots of people are hungry. I think really this is an issue that we want and we need to tackle. Next slide, please, Patrick. I'll skip this one and move to the next one, please. So I work for Upcycle Foods Inc., as I said, but I'm also on the board of the Upcycle Food Association. And about 4 years ago, the founder of the company that I work for came together with a band of people and said, I think we need to create a community of people who are committed to doing more with food waste. And so they set up the Upcycle Food Association and created a standardized definition of upcycle food, which is shown here, which essentially means that food that would otherwise have gone to landfill and not gone to human consumption is procured, processed, and put back into the human food system, officially counts as upcycled. I think the Upcycle Food Association also has made great strides in providing not only a standard, but also a certification. So when you buy an ingredient and or a food product that has been certified, what you're buying is trust and authenticity. Because the supply chain of that ingredient and or product has been fully audited by a third party to say that this truly would have gone to landfill and is being upcycled back into human food. Frankly, where I come from, I think that upcycle food is a no-brainer. I think that upcycle food is the future of food systems. My aspiration is that all food systems, whether you work for a small startup or whether you work for a Nestle or a Mondelez or a big food company, all food systems are designed with a minimum amount of upcycled ingredients in them. Because why wouldn't you want to use the resources that are going to be wasted first before you use virgin materials? Next slide, please. So this will be familiar to Chad and Joe, maybe. This is spent grain from the beer making process. This is our core ingredient, which we upcycle. We have to use a drying process, a patented drying process, because when beer is made, the spent grain is wet and it can't stay wet for very long in order for it to be safe for human consumption. So we create an upcycled flour called Supergrain Plus. Supergrain Plus is incredibly rich in fiber and protein, because once you've used grain in the beer making process, all the sugars have been taken out, because that's the food that the yeast needs in order to ferment to create the beer. So you're mostly left behind with fiber and protein. And so we create a flour that then goes back into delicious products. Next slide, please. And here we are, some products that our flour is in. So if you happen to be in Kroger, or you happen to be in Sprouts or Whole Foods or Albertsons or any of those retailers, you may come across Kroger's Simple Truth bread, which includes our supergrain flour. Artorias is a bakery in San Francisco, but is also sold through many different retailers. Our flour is in their naan bread. If you go to various different food service outlets, Deorio sell their dough to many different pizza outlets. Our high fiber, high protein flour will also be in the pizza dough, and Stone and Skillet muffins, also using our flour. Next slide, please. I think the thing that concerns most of us here is, what do consumers really think? And the truth is, it's one of the biggest hurdles, I would say, to convince people that using waste is not a bad thing. And I think that whilst we're talking about food waste, what I prefer to talk about is rescuing nutrition. Because as soon as you put the waste title on something, people assume that it's kind of dirty and smelly and not very appetizing. But there is some encouraging data that says that consumers are more cognizant of food waste. They're trying to reduce their own food waste. They are open to eating at restaurants that are using all the leftovers and using food waste, and that they want to do better. So when they go to the supermarket, they want to do better and they want to make better choices. And by that I mean choices that are good nutritionally, but also choices that are better for the planet. Next slide, please. This is, I just wanted to leave this with you because this is, I think this is more or less my last slide. This is a burger. We work with a lot of food service, and we work with a lot of chefs. We have created many different recipes with different chefs. And this is a delicious burger that was created basically pretty much all from upcycled food. And I just wanted to leave this here as an inspiration, and I'm sure Joe and Chad will talk more about what you can do with food that would otherwise be wasted, but to show you that food that will go in your trash can or food that will go to landfill not only is full of really great nutrition like fiber, protein, micronutrients, but also can make super delicious food. So if anybody's interested and wants to find more about upcycling and breads and flours and snacks, then feel free to connect with me after the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a inspiration to hear about some of the creative ways that that's being used. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the nutrition content. I know you definitely talked about the value of rescuing nutrition. I think that idea of the food, the dignity in food and being able to really not only access that, but democratize that, right? Where more individuals can get access to foods that are rich in these nutrients, when we know that many of the populations that we're serving are struggling to get access to fiber, access to a lot of ultra processed foods are really limited in that. So as a dietitian, that's always one of the areas that you and I find ourselves talking about, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how not only are we, impacting food waste, but we're also really being able to encourage individuals to have foods that would have otherwise been limited for them.
Well, obviously you're an expert nutritionist, Victoria, and you'll know how hard it is to get people to choose healthier foods, right? And I mean, people love what they love, and despite lots and lots and lots of information being thrown at people all the time about healthy diet and Mediterranean diet being good for you and all of those things, it's still very difficult, I think, for people to make different choices, not only because of taste preferences, but also because of the size of their wallets, right? So I think in the upcycle field, there are about 263 members, and most of those are startups operating across a wide range of categories. And but I think what the reason why I'm so passionate about what we do is because I think the ingredients that we make really are, because they're so highly nutritious, because they're high in fiber and high in protein, what's important for me is that we meet consumers where they're at. So instead of trying to convince them that they should buy this snack over here or this beverage over here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, using these ingredients, where are they, right? So if they're going to buy a loaf of bread, how do we make sure that in that loaf of bread it's got as much fiber as it possibly can? So the Super Grain Plus is 40% fiber and 30% protein, right? Which is much higher than a standard all-purpose flour. So we almost treat it like a fortification inclusion, if you like. So if you're going to go to that bread manufacturer and you're going to say you're going to use all-purpose flour anyway to make this bread, why not include 20% or 30% of this Super Grain Plus, which has got all that extra fiber and protein, so that when somebody eats that product they're going to eat anyway, they're going to get some of their daily recommended allowance of fiber. I think especially fiber, for me, I'm on a mission to make sure that more people eat their recommended daily of fiber, because the benefit, the overall well-being benefit via gut health is clinically proven, scientifically proven, and it would help with a lot of many different issues, including immunity, brain health, appetite management, feeling full, all those things. So, and I think the reason why I like starting with bread is because it doesn't matter what your background is, where you're from, your culture, your religion, whatever, there's always bread at the center of it, whether it be a flatbread or a naan bread or a pita bread or a tortilla, or there's always bread at the center of bringing people together. I think bread is one of the most democratic foodstuffs. So my mission is also, I mean, we're working with cookie and cookie manufacturers and snack manufacturers, because this isn't about creating separate category of things that has upcycled ingredients in it. This is about going to where consumers are at and meeting them there and saying, hey, if you're going to buy that cookie, let me give it to you with more fiber and more protein in it.
I love that. Yeah. And I think it really amplifies that this is a resource, not something that's worthy to be wasted, right? And even how we change our language around that. I'm wondering too, and what we often do here is, there's an infrastructure issue that each of you kind of took on, right? Because it's not always the easiest thing to look at how to incorporate these things. But what about the cost issue? When you look at sort of using materials that maybe would be traditionally used versus upcycled materials, what is the cost difference there?
Yes, I think that's a fair point, right? Because I think when you are taking somewhere, we're working with manufacturers to take their waste streams. We have to process it. In order for us to process it, that's going to cost some money, right? Because we need equipment to process it and turn it into something else, and we're not alone in that. So there is some on cost to that. So if you compare that to, say, standard or purpose flour, for example, there is going to be an on cost. But I think that's where different business models are really important, and we're not really interested in, whilst we have to make some profit to feed and pay the people that work for us, we're not interested in working with people who aren't interested in different business models, number one. And number two, as we're still a pretty fledgling movement and a very small startup, so as we get bigger and get scale, the cost of that material will go down. So what we always figure into our models, and depending on who we work with, is that runway. So one of the reasons why I'm so excited about talking here today is because we need wider scale adoption, and we need more and more people to look for that upcycled logo on their pack, so that upcycled can become the norm, and it can become as cost efficient as taking the virgin wheat and making flour from that. So I think it's fair to say that, and we don't want to pass that cost on to the consumer, obviously, right? We want to make that democratic, but we have to continue to make upcycled more mainstream in order to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So really, as we vote with our dollars, the more that we're doing that, the more it really strengthens the infrastructure for this process, which helps to really empower this process to be a lower cost to consumers.
Exactly.
Jen just came in to the chat asking, do the companies that give you spent material pay you a tipping fee?
No, they don't pay us a tipping fee. In fact, I mean, obviously, if we're going to do something else with their waste, most people who've got manufacturing waste stream, it costs them money to for somebody to pick that waste and transport it to animal feed, where it's often going right now, or to take it to wherever else they're disposing of it. Some people take their waste and have it sent to places where it's turned into biomass and therefore turned into renewable energy, for example. That costs money. We have a different business model, so it costs them less to give it to us to turn it into something.
Yeah. So that's the cost savings with all of that.
Yes.
Well. Yeah.
Yes, that's usually a reason why someone would be having a conversation. Yeah.
It has to be a win-win, though. Honestly, that's what I love about food rescue and upcycling is I feel like when it's a win-win for all involved, everyone wants to do what's right, but you're all business people. It has to actually make sense at the bottom line as well. So that completely makes sense. Joe, I'm going to head over to you. You've been so patiently waiting, and I have to be honest, I'm sorry, everyone that's virtual, but last night we had the opportunity to have an upcycle happy hour, and we got to try, and Joe, you'll share more about this, but this amazing beer that you partnered with 412 to make with the raspberries, and I have to say, it was one of my favorite ones. It's excellent, and I'm excited for you to share a little bit more about your partnerships.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, and really glad everybody enjoyed the cider. This has been a really cool opportunity for us to work with something upcycled, but also kind of eye-opening on our end. We work on the farm end all the time. We're talking about making cider. We use apples and other fruits occasionally. We work with brewers and grain as well. And often in our space, we talk about the farmer end of that waste, where we're grading apples or, levels of grain, and things are going, different directions towards consumers, whether it be, super fancy apples going to your supermarket shelf, apples that get pre-sliced, all the way down into what is not, it might be visually quality lower, but it's still, nutritionally and flavor quality still very high. And that's what we use in the cider world already anyways. And then actually, through working with, 412 and just thinking about it, once those, those supermarket apples or those super fancy apples, or again, we can talk about this with other fruit and grains and stuff like that, go out into the world and become not super fancy anymore. They're back down to cider quality. And how does that stream almost comes full circle? And that's kind of what we saw with the raspberries for this, project that we did. Those raspberries went to a store, probably, either were access or lived out, their life at the store, went to a food bank, and then the food bank used as much as they could. And we hit that third stream, and the fruit visual quality, it was a little overripe, but the flavor quality was still really high. There was nothing wrong with the fruit, and we were able to blend that into some cider and make something really, really great. And that was eye-opening for us. We don't see it much from the consumer end. On this end, we see, we purchase ingredients, and we talk about apples, and we talk about how the farmer, upcycles, again, whether it goes to pressed apples to feed, or we have, there's some apple flour programs similar to the grain flour that you see as well. But never, hey, once these apples go to consumer and come back, or any fruit, again, is there an opportunity for us to use that again? And I think, it's really great to hear about, the rescue nutrition part too. And for me, as someone making alcohol on my own, it's a little uncomfortable to be, hey, can we have access to this fruit to make alcohol? But working with a partner like 412, you start to find the end of that stream. And if that fruit's still good enough quality to make something, flavorfully right, we can tell the story and be like, this is just one thing we can do. And, broaden that to, this is not waste product. This is just, reallocated, product. And there's still nutritional streams all the way up into this. So it was exciting and eye-opening to work, through this process all the way and see what we could do, and, see different places that this can really help.
Yeah, it's an incredible partnership when you start to see that, and I love your comment about it being really full circle, and that EPA triangle, right? Like, let's make sure it goes to the right places at the right times and gets fully utilized at its highest value, and then really gets captured as best as we can. And once it gets to that place where it's not as visually sort of acceptable, what are the places that could go? Because there are a lot of those things. I think that's immediately where it kind of starts to shift into the waste stream when it has such value still left. One of the things so we had the opportunity to try, there was an apple cider donut beer. There was also a beer made from hoagie rolls from the Pittsburgh Pirates that they then utilize. So it's fun to learn about this process. But for those who are a little bit new to this idea, how would you utilize different types of ingredients in something like a distillery or beer, utilizing those sugars and kind of flavor profiles? Can you talk a little bit more about that, Joe?
Yeah, of course. I think we're still in a huge, craft boom in the U.S. There's a lot of small producers. There's even a lot of large producers that are willing to take a lot of chance on trying new things, which is exciting. So on our end, the raspberries, for example, we hadn't made a raspberry cider in the past. And through, working through this program, this upcycling, having them available to us was an opportunity to try something that, wasn't just us going to the market and buying new fruit. It, came from somewhere where it might have went to waste instead, and just adds to the story and gives us the opportunity to play with that. And I think organizations like 412 in like approaching, local makers, whether they're distillers, brewers, winemakers or cider makers, will find tons of opportunities to make, utilize, whether it's just sugars from fruit or different flavors. And, on the brewing end, you can take all of those carbohydrates to create, interesting brews and collaborations and things like that. And I think you can do it year round too. I think the timing can be a struggle with fruit sometimes because everything has a shelf life and people have operating schedules. But I think, there's always folks in the craft industry or, the upcycle industry that are willing to try something to see if it works and be able to tell the story too.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point because we get this question a lot because 412 is a little bit more established. Some of our other partners and those that are, tuning in on live stream may really be interested in these collaborations. I know we've talked about this from a manufacturing standpoint. There can be a lot of challenges to, the way that rescue kind of works where we get a lot of one thing very quickly. It's not as predictable. A lot of the upcycling journey is a more predictable journey and having to know where those streams are coming from. So how does that work when you want to establish a partnership? What would you suggest some of these organizations do in order to sort of build some of those collaborations, to your point that there is an openness in the community, but how should they maybe go about that?
Yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to someone local and just really start that conversation. The conversation, and we saw it with our, collaboration too, is we started months in advance. And, on our end, as soon as we had the conversation, we were just open to like, hey, whatever you can find in the stream, we'll play with it and we'll try to create an interesting product that tells, the story of what's really going on here. And I think a lot of, fermentation facilities would be really open to that specifically, or anybody that's kind of in the market for upcycled food. On my end, we were connected through another organization, and I've taken a lot from it and learned a lot. And I think anybody would really be open to that opportunity. And I think we just, on my end, people just don't know it's there. And by having someone like 412 or any kind of local food rescue program, maybe just visit a farmer's market where producers are at, or, talk to some folks and say, hey, we have some of these opportunities. I think you'll find that more, producers will be interested in the opportunities than you might even have, food to help out with for that end of it.
Can I also add, by the way, Joe, once you've made the cider, what's left over, you could send to me because there's still nutrition left in that, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I can turn that into a powder, which then can go into smoothies or snacks or something else. So also don't forget that there are other things that you can do with the waste of the waste with other partners.
I love that point. And I think more and more as we have these conversations, not only does it increase the awareness of the consumer to actually look for these products, but also I love your point, Joe, of like, wow, it was really eye-opening. I mean, being able to see like what opportunities are out there, and also where could it go from here? What are other higher uses of this nutrition that can happen as well? That's really a big deal. It's interesting, speaking of the happy hour, because Chad actually made the most fantastic blueberry ice cream that I think I've ever had from Millie's. And they used just a palette of blueberries that were sort of in the same genre as what Joe was saying, whereas not as visually pretty. I think they had gotten a little smashed, but it was literally one of the best things I had ever had. And I know that you've also worked with 412 Chad around bananas, because for those of you who are food rescue organizations on this live stream, you're well aware that bread and bananas are probably the bane of most of our existence. It's so hard to know what to do with these items sometimes because we get so much of them. So Chad, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your collaboration and kind of how that came about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks so much for having us on. We love participating in these things because, I think it's really important. It's really important to us for a whole host of reasons, and a fairly new reason for me with two young children I'm now seeing that there are kids in my kids' school who their meals are at school only, right? I mean, and that's we're very lucky to be able to realize some financial stability and food stability around making ice cream, right? Who would have ever thought that was a thing that could continue to help to push our family forward. But realizing that my kids have friends at school and their meals are lunch, breakfast and lunch every day, and then 2 days a week, right, getting stuff sent home. So it's important to see that, because nobody wants to see people go hungry. But to kind of take a little bit of a different turn now off of that comment, bananas, blueberries, things like that have always been really fun to work with, right? We are certainly an ice cream company that likes to use real food in our ice cream, right? We're not going to be using blueberry flavoring or banana flavoring or something of that nature. And we're, I think, of a really ideal size at the moment, and for a while, frankly, where we can take a significant amount of those things and work them into the system, right? Dr. Lara, I heard you mention that you worked at Molson Coors, right? And it might be a little bit more difficult for somebody of that size to fit it into the schedule. And unfortunately, Joe, I'm familiar with your product, just not necessarily of the size of business you are, but it's awesome that you were able to do something with raspberries. But then on the other hand, right, there are businesses that are real small, and they're certainly trying to make a difference by accepting those things, and maybe a case of blueberries, which anything is better than nothing, right? But I think that right now where we're at, it's kind of a perfect match. We have the storage, we have the capabilities to be able to accept a pallet or 2 or 3 pallets of bananas or blueberries or raspberries or whatever. I still haven't figured out how to successfully use bread. Try as we might, it ends up being.
I could help you with that.
Okay, great. Let's connect offline.
Super Grain Flat Plus is a great addition to ice cream, but I can help you with that, Chad.
Great, fantastic. We should absolutely connect. But also, thinking about how a smaller organization, smaller than 412, connects with makers. I think Joe nailed it spot on, right? It's just creating a relationship with these people. Because I think one of the things to think about that, we've all discussed in some form or function to this point is, we're all doing this to make money, right? And if you're showing somebody, hey, listen, I'll give you a pallet of free bananas. There's certainly some processing cost that goes in it, right? But, a smaller producer is going to love that, right? Because that's something free. And so it makes those economics great. And then, what we've historically done is take that and create some sort of dollar amount that we give back to 412 Food Rescue, right? Because the expanding upon that partnership is great. But and I want to talk just real quickly too. I see a question from Cassie here, right, about local government playing a role in supporting or incentivizing upcycled business development in cities and counties, right? So we look at upcycled things as Dr. Lara said, in 2 different streams. So we have a waste stream, which is composting things, which is very difficult. We want to compost things, but as an ice cream company, we can't put something in a compostable dumpster out back of our shop, because in an urban environment, we'll be overrun with rats in seconds. But then also, the last time I priced compostable garbage bags, I think they were $1 a piece. And so it's like, what are we doing here to incentivize it? I mean, I realize that people, again, they need to process those bags and those things. So, local government could absolutely help by subsidizing these type of things. Now that's just waste, right? That's not upcycling something that creates nutrition or food for somebody. But it's still something that eventually gets some better use other than just ending up in a dump somewhere taking up space with, newspapers and plastic bottles. I think that is always something that is a challenge for us is, how do we tap into some of these, budget surplus subsidies that, local, state, local city, state, and even federal government to some degree. We know that there are some coffers out there, and unlocking some of those to help to subsidize for all of us, I think goes a long way. But then to just figure out how to help people to connect the pieces, right? I mean, if we think about even local county government, there's DCED, so community and economic development officers that are great people that are connecting businesses with grants and things of that nature. And if they could help to just connect the piece, right? Not a regular daily part of their job, but to connect the pieces with either grant money or just a relationship. I think that would go a huge way. None of us are looking for, to be, hugely compensated for this. I think, I can't speak for Joe and Dr. Lara, but, we do this as something that we feel passionate about. As I said, it is free and we are trying to make some money from it, but it's not, I'm not going to retire to an island in Fiji off of free blueberries from 412 Food Rescue.
No flour that goes into bread, Chad.
Yeah, right.
Right. We're doing this because we want to be paid fairly, but more importantly, because we're all bound by the fact that we see food waste as being criminal, and especially with so many hungry people in the country and worldwide, we want to make sure that everybody gets fed, right? Yeah, I would actually. There's the question about local government. I think that I only recently have met somebody from the government in LA, and they just found our website and emailed our website. But I would love to understand how the government could help with grants to forge partnerships between small businesses to create that opportunity, right? And especially in my area of innovation and science, I'm always looking for grant money to do some actual science-based research on the nutrition and on the product development side. So I think local governments can help there. One of the states that does really well at supporting these kind of initiatives is Minnesota. Minnesota has a great infrastructure at supporting startups, and particularly startups that are working in the more sort of sustainable planet world. So I'd like to see that in more states.
Yeah, I'd say the to your point, Chad, is we're the raspberries or anything. There's no huge profit to be made, but it's an opportunity for us to learn and for us to show consumers opportunities too. For me, it's been very eye opening. Like I said, on the farmer end, for us, we work with a good amount of apple producers, and the way they talk about it's not upcycling, but utilizing their crop to the maximum, doesn't translate to the consumer use end. And that's been, a pretty big eye-opening thing for me too. What happens to all the, supermarket, super fancy graded apples, after they're not super fancy anymore, like I was saying earlier. And this has been an opportunity for me to talk about more, talk about what we're talking about more in my organization, and see what we can do better too.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a great point in thinking about not only how can government and other entities support with either incentives or looking at bringing together more of collaboration, more awareness, but also thinking about, it's been really interesting because oftentimes there's been a way to leverage those partnerships so that because nonprofits are often really just trying to also raise money and figure all these things out. There has been a lot of generosity in these collaborations where, to Joe's point earlier, this is a beautiful story to tell, right? So when you can consumers excited about this story and they can understand, a lot of times there will be a collaboration where it's either used at an event or this is part of a fundraising opportunity where everyone together, it kind of extends all organizations because they're a part of those things. And so from a marketing standpoint, I see Dr. Laura's shirt, which I think is a great example, right? Eat beer, because I think it produces the conversation that needs to happen so that we can extend this for all of the organizations. And it also brings this idea of sustainability and connection to collaborating on a deeper level. I wonder, for all of you, what have you felt in these collaborations have been a benefit for either increased awareness or connections to a deeper sort of local community?
Yeah, for us, it's just, tapping into the clientele that 412 builds awareness for, right? And for us, it's just being able to grow the eyeballs on what we are doing, right? And that's always a really great part of the partnership, and we hope to bring, hold up our end of that as well. So saying, here are Millie's people who may not be familiar with food rescue people. For all of you who are here in the Pittsburgh area, our Venn diagram between food rescue and Millie's is pretty overlapping. But it's just, it's showing people what you're doing that is neat and novel. People like novelty. And once you can get them interested in that, you can then tell the story in a fashion that gets people even more excited.
Yeah, great point. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was saying probably the exact same experience. And on my end, again, opening us as a company up to a community that can help us do better on the food waste end too. Not only can we help by being part of the stream or part of the cycle, but we can, anything we have on our end, like Dr. Lara was telling me, we can bring that to a cycle or to a waste stream that makes more sense. Not a waste stream, but a nutrition stream in a better way too. So I think, as a company, it's educational and gives us some goals to create that make us a better partner in all of this. And then, through the partnership too, also say, tell that story to consumers, and hopefully they have the same experience, right? As a company or as a consumer, like, hey, what can we do to make this better? And then hopefully, talking about government and private, they can follow that too. Be like, there's a lot to do here.
Absolutely.
I think the upcycling is still sort of an emerging, right? So part of my mission is to raise upcycling and upcycled food in people's consciousness, in all people's consciousness, because you'd be surprised how even at the government level and those people who are essentially working within food systems, upcycling is still relatively new. So at the sort of government policy level, we need to raise it up, and we've just managed to get some senators involved in the No Time to Waste bill, which means hopefully upcycling will be included in the farm bill, because people talk about waste, but actually upcycling wasn't necessarily elevating food to its natural use or giving dignity back to waste food wasn't on their radar. So that's something that's happened recently, the No Time to Waste. And then in consumers' consciousness, yes, food waste, they understand it, they're trying to get a handle on it at home. But the idea that you can actually create really delicious, nutritious, yummy food from there's still a gap there, actually. So using every single occasion to raise consciousness with people who are spending dollars in a supermarket, that's still a big task for us as a community. And and so every opportunity that I have like this, but also locally, I talk to people all the time about how food systems need to use upcycled ingredients wherever possible. I think one of the things that smaller local businesses that Chad and Joe have an advantage over big businesses is that they can use blueberries and raspberries and apples when they're available. And for bigger businesses, it's much harder, right? Because they've got much bigger supply chains. So the first question they ask you is, well, what does the supply look like? Can we get this volume? Can we get this volume for this many years? And the thing about upcycled food is it doesn't always work like that, right? And so I think what you'll see also with upcycled food is what you should see is a support and a network and an infrastructure around local businesses, right, who are agile and able to change their product lineup depending on the availability of that waste stream. The second thing is, you don't want to be moving waste all around the country, because that defeats the purpose of using waste in the first place, right? It's a lower carbon footprint, and you don't want to be adding to that by transporting it to all these different places. So I think raising awareness within consumer consciousness is probably our biggest task. And using exposure and using the opportunity to create ice cream, crackers, bread, snacks, whenever, or cider, whenever possible. That's how we get people engaged.
Those are such great points, and thank you all for sharing such insight, even in the chat. Cassie telling us Stop Waste grant funding, and also asking a little bit. Alex is asking about the impact and the volume and quality of materials you receive for upcycling. You notice that?
Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that, Alex, as it's still a pretty inconsistent stream for us. It's fairly dynamic. I think that's, to Dr. Lara's point, it's like, if we could count on 2 pallets of bananas every 2 weeks that came in, on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., that makes things a lot easier. But oftentimes it tends to be a call from somebody at 412 that says like, hey, we have this. And I say, all right, great, we'll take it. And they're like, perfect. We hoped you'd say that. We're coming down the road right now. So fitting that into the schedule makes it fun and challenging, but we don't see anything enough.
I did used to work for Dole, obviously, Victoria. So I did work for a big global fruit business. And I didn't see an impact of, I didn't really see an impact of inflation, but Dole is a big banana business, Dole Asia, and the banana plantation is in the Philippines. And I set up the upcycling business in Dole, which is called Dole Specialty Ingredients, because we had a zero waste agenda, no fruit left behind, and bananas waste just really easily. It's like it was our biggest waste problem, and not because they go bad or anything, but because actually bananas get rejected so easily before they even make it onto a pallet and into a supermarket, because they don't look right. And I think we have to accept that those of us not us here, but the food system, we've created that problem, right? Because we are the ones who've said these bananas and these apples and all have to look perfect. And because these,
you just got to do what they do with black truffles and tell them that the worms eat the most delicious ones.
Well, exactly. So we Dole was regularly sitting on a banana mountain and not knowing what to do with it. So that's why we set up the specialty ingredients business, and now we create powders, functional powders. So there's a green banana powder which has resistant starch in it, which is a natural prebiotic. So if you're putting green banana powder in your cake or your cookie or your bread or wherever, you're sort of feeding, again, meeting consumers where they're at and feeding them, giving them a natural prebiotic. And also then that went on to using other parts of the pineapple, because obviously we deal in pineapples. So there's bromelain in the pineapple core, and there's anti-inflammatory units, other parts of the pineapple. But that's okay for a big company who can invest in some machinery to process the product in order to create these powders, right? At the local level, again, you're doing what you can. You're making ice cream, you're making cider, you're making bread, whatever, and you're doing it based on when things are available. So I think what you'll see much more limited edition and much more seasonal. And I think the idea that I grew up with, raspberries and strawberries being a summer fruit, and apples and rhubarb being an autumn winter fruit, and so on, and lettuce only being available in summer, and we will get back to that, because we will have to, because that also contributes to managing food waste, but also managing footprint, right, and not flying fruit and vegetables around the world.
Yeah, I think those are really important pieces, and thinking about how this is such a do what we can with what is in front of us in our domain and the area, whether it's consumer, whether it's a small business, whether it's a large business, and then ultimately looking at the opportunity to sort of spread the word and really make sure that others are increasing their awareness. And also, you know, I think it really does give each of you the opportunity in your own sectors to be able to say, hey, there's some opportunity here. What does this look like? How do we do this better? I also will just put a quick plug in for Dr. Lara, if you want to share a little bit more about the Upcycle Association before we wrap up. And just, you did talk about that at the beginning, but how groups that might be interested in getting more involved in some of this could be a part of a larger voice.
Yes, so if you go to upcyclefoods.org, that is the Upcycle Food Association landing page. You can sign up for a newsletter for free, so you can find out what's going on in the across the community. You can become an individual member. I would say it's not cost prohibitive to become an individual member. And then if you or your company or your not-for-profit are interested in becoming a member, there's a sliding scale of membership as well, depending on the size of your organization. Obviously, if you're a $1 billion company, then you pay a lot more if there are 5 people in your company. I think what's really good about the community is obviously we are now 263 members. We've so far certified about 490-ish products and or ingredients. We obviously want to continue to certify more because we want to be sure that if you're making a claim about upcycled food on your product or your beverage or your ingredient, that it's authentically upcycled. I think that obviously, more importantly, it's a community of people who are like-minded and share the same purpose, which is reducing the impact of food waste on greenhouse gas emissions, but also bringing dignity back to food that would otherwise go in the trash, and putting it and giving it back to people and feeding people with it. So if you're interested, you feel free to connect with me also, because I can also help you. But we'd love to have more members.
Wonderful. And thank you all so much for both your time and your attention. Thank you, those of you who attended the live stream and were so engaged in our chat as well. Stay tuned. We've got some great sessions on the way. We look forward to connecting in the future. And again, thank you all panelists. We are so grateful for what you're doing in this space. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.